Iran's Guardian Council is attempting to calm public anger over last week's disputed presidential election. It's invited the three losing candidates to a meeting to discuss their complaints, and it's also started examining almost 650 alleged electoral breaches. So far, that hasn't been enough to slow the anti-government protests, which have now spilled onto the world sporting stage. The ABC's Middle East correspondent, Ben Knight, had to leave Iran yesterday, and he filed this report from the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Opposition supporters were on the streets again, this time marching in silence, heeding their leader's call for peaceful protest. They've been protesting like this all week, but the protest movement is branching out into new areas too. 6 players in Iran's national soccer team appeared at a World Cup qualifier in Seoul wearing green armbands in support of opposition presidential candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi. There were protesters in the crowd too, and the pictures were broadcast live back home to Iran. President Ahmadinejad is closely linked to this team. He reportedly loans his presidential plane to transport them to matches, so this was a pointed gesture of defiance. The public displays of dissent in this strict Islamic country are shocking enough. But the hidden power struggles of the country's ruling elite are also starting to show. The daughter of former President Rafsanjani spoke at a rally in support of Mir Hossein Mousavi. State television broadcast these pictures too.
Hashemi Rafsanjani is still an important figure in Iranian politics, and this protest is giving him the chance to get the upper hand against the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
The Supreme Leader is facing an incredibly delicate situation. He's facing not only a rebellion on the streets of really all of Iran's major cities, but also an intense amount of pressure behind the scenes from members of the power structure.
The Iranian regime has always been prickly about foreign interference in its domestic affairs, and that hasn't changed.
How can it be that some European officials have made irresponsible comments which are inconsistent with all international norms? It is not acceptable for any country or the official of a foreign country to make blatant comments against a nation.
While the reformers have people power on their side, the Ayatollah and his preferred president, Ahmadinejad, have the Revolutionary Guard and the Islamic militia they control. Amateur video taken by protesters purportedly shows the militia attacking neighbourhoods which supported the opposition, although it's hard to verify the authenticity of these pictures. The opposition's planning an even bigger rally tonight, declaring a day of mourning for the people who've died in the clashes of the last few days. This crisis has led to protests in cities around the world from expatriate Iranians who see it as a chance that the regime they fled may be coming to an end. But that doesn't mean they support Mir Hossein Mousavi.
So we reject Ahmadinejad, we reject Mir Hossein Mousavi, who was the president, who was the prime minister, under the Khomeini rule in that time, who had personally ordered the execution of 30,000 political prisoners.
Most of the protesters in Iran know something of Mir Hossein Mousavi's background, but have largely chosen to ignore that. They also want an end to the regime as a whole, but see a Mousavi presidency as the first step along the way. Ben Knight, Lateline.
Well, a journalist who's remained in Tehran is the Australian newspaper's Middle East correspondent, John Lyons. He joins me on the phone now. John, you were planning to try to get out on the streets during the past few hours. Were you able to do that, and what did you see?
Yes, Lee, I visited Tehran University to try to assess what happened there last Sunday. It appears there was a massacre there of at least 5 people dead, 3 men and 2 women. So I went with some locals over to the campus or to the park next to the university. The campus was all closed, soldiers out the front. But through the others I was with, was able to speak to some of the students. Most of them, frankly, said we're just too scared to talk. But it looks like they have put up names of some of the people killed, and that list was torn down fairly quickly. And then on the way back to the hotel, a short time ago, I saw a huge crowd developing in Imam Khomeini Square, one of the main squares of Tehran, and yet again the same old pattern that you have here every night of large crowds gather to protest the Mousavi supporters. Surrounding them are riot police, and then usually off in the distance, maybe a street or two away, are the most feared of all are the Basij militia.
And John, how heavy is that militia and police presence on the streets? Is it pervasive?
Yes, it is very pervasive. Mind you, the Basij militia have such a reputation that somebody only needs to utter the word Basij and some people sort of leave quickly. And, of course, that could be some of the Ahmadinejad people in the crowd just uttering that word. But I've seen them a couple of times, and they actually make the riot police, look like gentlemen. They're in plain clothes. They're often carrying chains and batons on the back of motorbikes. They appear to be accountable to nobody. And they really are the enforcers of this revolution. They really are the instrument that the Ahmadinejad campaign or government is using to break up and suppress and put fear into crowds.
John, are the protests showing any signs of petering out, or are they gathering momentum?
Well, they seem to be gathering momentum, especially outside Tehran. It's very difficult to get reliable information. They're not petering out in Tehran, but, the real question, I suppose, is what happens next? Where does it go?
John Lyons, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll look forward to reading your story in The Australian tomorrow.